there's been a lot of talk about free agency in pro wrestling, and I feel like we should have a conversation about this a little bit more in detail. On my main channel, I have been talking about certain WWE contracts that are coming up relatively soon. And obviously, that's a whole issue in itself. The fact that WWE has waited until the very last minute. And obviously, we've learned some details about the person that was in charge of that, who was recently let go by the WWE. And then obviously, this has led to WWE trying to figure things out. But obviously, there's people in WWE and AEW, and throughout the next few months, or pretty much forever, there's always going to be talks of contracts expiring. And then, of course, when I talk about this on my main channel, the main argument or the main thing that I see typically in the comment section is that so-and-so isn't leaving. The biggest one that I'm seeing is Chad Gable. Now, I just want to make it really clear that I don't believe Chad Gable will be leaving the WWE. But there is something fascinating about the idea of somebody potentially leaving the WWE to go to AEW. Vice versa. The idea that somebody from AEW, who you may not expect to leave, could very well go into WWE. Now, let me just remind you some of that surprise factor. That 24, 48 hours of when it came out that Jade Cargill would not be staying in AEW was a very interesting time period because a lot of people were like shocked, obviously. And I think that just adds a little bit of fun to the professional wrestling industry. You might not like AEW, you might not like WWE, but you probably have wrestlers that you enjoy watching. Obviously, Becky Lynch is a great example. Becky Lynch is one of the largest, most popular female wrestlers, and she's no longer in contract with WWE. And again, let me just preface this by saying, I don't anticipate Becky leaving the WWE, but the idea that Becky Lynch could actually leave the WWE to go to AEW is fascinating because there are matchups that we obviously have not seen on WWE television. So, for example, I look at somebody like Thunder Rosa, Deonna Purrazzo, Britt Baker. I look at Becky Lynch and I think it would be really fun to watch her have matches with them. I look at Toni Storm, who is doing excellent character work in AEW. And she was in WWE, but she wasn't really given an opportunity on the main roster. It was very short-lived. If Becky were to cross over into AEW territory, that's another potential matchup. I said this on my main channel, but the idea that maybe Chad Gable could potentially leave WWE and have some really incredible matches with Will Ospreay, Kenny Omega, Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe. I mean, the list continues to increase. That's the beauty of free agency. Now, obviously, you're going to like a certain company more than the other for a lot of fans. Maybe you don't like how AEW presents wrestling. Maybe you like WWE a little bit more. Maybe it's the opposite. But my point that I'm making is when you have a free agency as strong as this one, where potential stars can jump ship to another company, it opens up a little bit more that you possibly may have not seen. And of course, it kind of becomes tricky when you have talent who you might believe are underutilized. So, for example, in WWE, a lot of people right now are talking about Dijak, who is also potentially going to be having an expired contract soon. Now, WWE is obviously in talks and trying to extend. But I look at Dijak as somebody who in NXT was incredible. So far, since being drafted to Raw, we haven't seen much. My point is this. If you feel like Dijak is being underutilized, if you feel like WWE isn't using him correctly, don't you like the possibility of Dijak going somewhere else and being able to do a lot of cool things? That's what makes free agency intriguing to me. The idea that somebody could go elsewhere and become utilized better. And trust me, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. We have seen that. Malachi Black, Andrade, Keith Lee all jump ship to AEW. Those three are mostly talked about as people who weren't utilized properly in AEW. Now, obviously, wrestling is subjective, but I do agree that there have been people to join AEW that have not been utilized correctly. There have been people that have jumped ship to WWE that haven't necessarily been utilized correctly. And sometimes all it takes is finding the right situation. And I think Tony Storm is actually the best example of this. Tony Storm in NXT UK was wonderful. Tony Storm being called up to the main roster on SmackDown and barely being utilized, losing all of the cool factors that she had in NXT UK to begin with. She goes to AEW. I would say she was utilized correctly. And again, wrestling is subjective, so maybe not everybody agrees with me. But the point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes the grass is greener on the other side. And we're just speaking about the two largest companies in North America. We haven't factored in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and we haven't factored in TNA and MLW and GCW. A great example of somebody who is really killing it right now, AJ Francis, formerly known as Top Dollar. He left WWE. He was released. And he didn't go to AEW. He went to TNA, and now we're seeing him across TNA and MLW. We've seen a little bit of him in GCW as well. I like the idea of being able to see people jump around a little bit. Free agency shakes up the industry as a whole, which is why it's a big deal when I talk about a healthy wrestling industry. This is why I do want AEW to win. This is also another reason why I do want WWE to win and TNA and all of these other companies, because quite frankly, there are a lot of wrestlers I enjoy watching. And sometimes their current situation just isn't that good. I think right now it's actually really interesting too. We should probably mention Ricky Starks. A lot of people don't know what's going on with him in AEW. It's a huge question mark, a lot of confusion, and I get it. Ricky Starks is a hell of a talent. A lot of people feel like AEW has dropped the ball and people want to see Ricky Starks in WWE. Do I personally think WWE will do a good job with Ricky Starks? I do. But I would also be foolish to not acknowledge the fact that it could be a bad situation. WWE also has a very stacked roster. WWE does things in the long game, building people up long term. The IWC, of course, wants it done immediately. So if Ricky Starks went into WWE and it took a couple months for WWE to really push him, people will immediately claim that WWE is dropping the ball. But the reality is, I like the idea of people being able to move around. And right now, there's a lot of contracts expiring. I want AEW to get a good TV deal because better TV deal means more money. And I think if you're one of these people that are tribalists, you just have to come to the acknowledgement that people will leave the company that you love more. Who really genuinely thought Adam Copeland would leave WWE, go to AEW, and do all these cool things? It's very fascinating. Very fascinating. Free agency is going to be one to pay attention to. And if you're not following me on my channels and socials, you're missing out because there is going to be a lot of talk about free agency.